Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So in my last video I responded to a few arguments against Byler, but there were a few more things I kept seeing come up, so I wanted to talk about those in this video as well. So I think Stranger Things has now reached a point where it can't keep hinting at something without eventually dealing with it. I'm not saying this because of shipping, and I'm not saying it lightly. I'm saying it because at a certain point, a story stops being vague and starts carrying responsibility for what it has been building. This video isn't about re-arguing individual scenes or symbolism I already spoke about before. If you're curious about that, you can look at my other videos about this, but it's about what all of this adds up to when you look at it as a whole. What's been strange to me is watching people look at the exact same evidence and come to completely opposite conclusions. We're looking at the same patterns, the same scenes, the same emotional beats, but they take all of that and see something completely different, or they say it means nothing, or that it's accidental, or that it was misread. I'm looking at the same material and thinking the exact opposite. That disconnect is really what this video is about. And it's not just people dismissing the evidence entirely. I'm also seeing people who accept that the evidence is there, but still draw a completely different conclusion about what they think the outcome will be. And that brings me to a video I saw by a YouTuber named Chowder's Crib. They actually agree that the Byler buildup exists. They acknowledge the symbolism, the emotional framing, and the patterns around Mike and Will. Where we disagree is on what that buildup means. Their argument is basically that even if all of this was intentional, the Duffer Brothers won't be brave enough to follow through on it. That they'll pull back at the end, play it safe, or avoid making Mike and Will an end pair because it would be too risky, too divisive, or too much backlash for a mainstream show like Stranger Things. And I want to respond to that directly because I believe the exact opposite. I don't think the Duffers are afraid of backlash in the way that argument assumes. Their actual writing history doesn't support that. These are writers who have repeatedly made choices they knew would upset parts of the audience, and they did them anyway because it served the story they wanted to tell. Killing characters isn't bravery, that's shock value. Bravery in writing is committing to long-term emotional arcs and following them through even when the reaction is mixed. The Duffers have doubled down on unpopular decisions before. They've revisited controversial storylines instead of erasing them. They've committed to slow burn setups that didn't pay off immediately and trusted the audience to sit with them. That doesn't look like writers who panic or back out. That looks like writers who know where their story is going and are willing to take their time getting there. What really undermines the idea that they'll pull back is how many chances they've already had to shut this down and they didn't. They could have clarified Mike's sexuality at multiple points. They could have resolved Will's feelings as purely one-sided. They could have closed the door gently and definitively. They had entire seasons to do that. They didn't. And that tells me this isn't accidental or careless, it's intentional. This is why Mike, specifically, is where the line gets crossed. This isn't about one scene people are obsessing over or one moment taken out of context. It's the fact that the same things keep happening around him again and again. He's constantly surrounded by queer-coded symbolism. He's written as uncomfortable with what's expected of him romantically, and on top of that, he's the person a gay character is in love with. These things don't exist separately, they stack. Any one of them by themselves wouldn't mean much, but all of them together, repeating across 4 seasons, stop feeling neutral. That's where the idea that people are just reading into it starts to fall apart. There's also the way Mike acts around Will, specifically. Mike isn't just awkward in a generic teenage way, he's different with Will in a way he isn't with his other friends. He hesitates, he's careful with his words, he avoids eye contact at certain moments, and he seems unsure of how to act. That's not how people usually behave around a friend they're completely comfortable with. It reads like discomfort that comes from feelings you don't know what to do with. At the same time, Mike is noticeably softer with Will than he is with anyone else. He speaks more gently, reassures him, and treats his feelings with more care than he does with anyone else, including Eleven. With Elle, Mike often sounds stressed or defensive. With Will, there's warmth and patience. People don't usually switch into that kind of tone unless someone matters to them in a deeper way. I also want to briefly respond to a comment I received that crossed a line personally, but raised arguments I think are worth addressing. One claim was that Mike has never shown interest in boys, but Mike has also never shown general interest in girls. His attraction has always been specifically to Elle, and even with 11, it's often conflicted and strained. Another argument was that Mike's waterfall comment was just a normal joke in season 5, and yes, it was a joke. The issue isn't the joke, it's that it comes right after 11 asks about happily ever after, and Mike deflects instead of engaging. That pattern of avoidance shows up repeatedly. There was also that claim that Lucas calling Mike and 11 lovebirds proves their endgame. And this is where storytelling roles matter. Lucas is not written as someone with special insight into other people's romantic futures. He's reacting to what he thinks is happening on the surface in that moment. I do want to make one exception here, and that's Murray. The Duffers clearly use Murray as a kind of relationship truth teller in the show. He's the character who calls things out, who reads people accurately, and who has correctly predicted or pushed successful relationships forward. That's very clearly his role. And it matters that Murray, the one character who is written that way, has never weighed in on Mike and Will. I also want to add that I previously said I thought Nancy and Jonathan were going to split up, but Murray's attitude towards them has made me backtrack on that a little, because he's used so specifically as a relationship truth teller. The fact that he treats their issues as something workable rather than final makes me think they're probably stagnating right now, not ending. And based on how Murray is framed, it seems more likely that they'll resolve their problems and eventually rekindle their relationship rather than break apart completely. But the main focus of this video is about Mike and Will, not Nancy and Jonathan, but I thought I would revisit that a little bit because I spoke about it before. Anyway, this is where the conversation usually shifts to Will, specifically the idea that even if Mike and Will don't happen, Will could still have a happy ending by being independent. In an interview, Noah was asked about people wanting Mike and Will to be together, and when he talked about how Byler fans would feel, he very clearly almost said the word happy before stopping and switching to the word satisfied instead. I'm not saying that was intentional confirmation of anything. What matters is why that wording comes up at all, because the debate around Byler endings almost always comes down to what kind of resolution Will's story is supposed to have. When people argue that Mike and Will don't need to happen, the alternative that's almost always offered is that Will can end the story independent and at peace with himself, and that this would somehow still count as a happy ending. The problem is that Will's story has never been about learning to be okay alone. His arc is about longing, invisibility, fear of rejection, and believing he might not be worthy of love. Ending that story with independence alone isn't fulfillment, it's endurance. Independence fits 11's journey more. It does not resolve Will's. That's why the word happy matters here. Happy implies fulfillment. Satisfied implies closure with or without fulfillment. Good writing can make people accept an ending they didn't want, but it doesn't usually make people happy about a love story built on vulnerability that never pays off. This isn't about Netflix collapsing or the show being canceled. The show would survive any ending. What's at stake is credibility and legacy. Backlash against queer characters fades. Accusations of queerbaiting don't really. Using queer-coded storytelling heavily around a central character and then denying its meaning would damage trust in the story itself, not because of politics, but because it wouldn't be honest. Given the amount of queer-coded symbolism attached to Mike, the emotional patterns tied to queerness, and the fact that a gay character is explicitly in love with him, there comes a point where ignoring or denying that meaning stops being interpretation and starts being erasure. So yeah, that's really where I land on this. I'll be honest, I probably wouldn't enjoy Stranger Things very much if Mike and Will didn't end up together, simply because of how invested I've become in the pairing over the years. And I don't think that investment came out of nowhere. The point is that when it comes to Mike and Eleven, and Mike and Will, I think the story needs to follow through on what it's been building for years. And from my perspective, Mike and Will together is the most natural follow through on that. Not doing so wouldn't just feel out of place or abrupt, it would raise questions about why the story spent so much time framing things the way it did in the first place. Thanks so much for watching. If you made it this far, I really appreciate it. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.